I learned a lot of valuable lessons from this story I'm about to tell you. 1. Vaping isn't worth getting snatched off the street. And 2. Always pay attention to movies. When I turned 21, I realized I'd never done anything exciting or rebellious my whole life. Even after I got to college, I stayed in my dorm and studied instead of going to parties, even though I knew where I'd rather be. How sad is that? So on my birthday, me and my bestie Anna decided we were gonna do all the stuff I'd missed out on. She was totally the opposite of me, a total party girl who loved breaking the rules. So I figured she was the right person for the job. After she got off work, we took the subway into the city and she took me to my very first scary movie. I was literally shaking the whole time, even before we saw the movie, because Anna told me she had beer hidden in her purse. I had no idea how she'd managed to keep her cool the whole time. To be honest, it was so fun, but not in the way I imagined. The fun part was the fear, being scared of something jumping out at me on the screen and the idea of getting caught with our drinks. Like, I knew what we were doing wasn't good, but it was one of the most exciting things I'd ever done. After the movie, Anna wanted to get me a cigarette, and that's where I drew the line. My grandpa smoked my whole life. He coughed all the time and sounded like an old truck when he spoke. Luckily, she understood and didn't try any of that peer pressure my mom always warned me about, but she did make a compromise. As an extra birthday gift, she was gonna buy me a Juul. I figured, what, right? I was down to try it, and if it was gross, I just wouldn't use it again. I started walking to a bodega, our arms linked and making sure to stay under the street lamps as it began to get dark. I'd never been to the city at night before, and I think that night would be my last. We took a shortcut through the park, which, looking back on it now, was a really dumb idea. From there, things just got worse and worse until I really thought I was gonna die that night. I don't know what happened exactly, I just remember Anna tripped and there was a snap in her ankle. She was in so much pain that she basically collapsed on me, and when I realized she wasn't going to be able to walk, I helped her to a bench and we sat as I called my roommate to come get us. The phone was ringing when the bag was put over my head. I started screaming as loud as I could, and a second later I heard Anna's muffled shouts too. My instinct was to start running. I managed to get to my feet before a pair of strong hands grabbed my arms and started dragging me away. The person put their hand over my mouth to silence me further, but I kept shrieking until my throat was raw in the hopes that anyone would hear me. I heard someone pop the trunk of the car and I struggled harder. I'd been to enough women's safety seminars to know that our chances of survival would drop by 50% if they got us to another location. But neither of us was strong enough. They put Anna in the car first, then someone picked me up and literally threw me in next to her. We were pretty much crushed together. There was so little space I didn't know how we would breathe if they closed the trunk. They did, and it felt like being shut in a tomb. I ripped the hood off of my head and started banging on the door, but when the car roared to life, it became obvious the old engine would be able to make way more noise than Anna and I combined. As we started driving away, I began to lose hope. Anna, who was never emotional, was crying next to me and saying over and over how sorry she was for getting us into this mess. I knew it wasn't her fault, and I hope she knows that now. And yes, that does mean we did survive, spoiler alert. It turns out movies may be more useful than you think. In the movie we just saw, a girl was also put in the trunk of a car and managed to get help by kicking out the tail light. I had no idea if it would work, but if it did, it could save us. If it didn't, we were likely dead anyways. So I started kicking the corner of the trunk as hard as I could, until suddenly I felt a rush of cool air against my ankle. Anna's head was facing the broken taillight, and I told her to put her arm through the newly formed gap and start waving. A few minutes later, I heard a cop car's siren and the vehicle came to a stop. I heard one of the cops shout at our captors to stay in the car while they opened the trunk, and we were free. It took a long time to get back to our old selves, but things got better once our kidnappers were put behind bars. It's scary to think what could have happened that night if we hadn't seen that movie. Hopefully, we won't have to use that knowledge again. I did a lot of partying a couple of years back when I had no business doing stuff like that. I was barely in high school, and I mean that in every sense. My parents just couldn't control me. I'd be out all night and either sleep through my classes or cut school totally to go hang out with my friends. Me and my parents fought a lot back then. I always came home smelling of something illegal, my attitude stank, and I'd even got a stick and poke tattoo of a goat on my arm. Yeah. It was a pretty bad time, but I thought I was living my best life. All that changed the night of the rave. I'd kind of planned to be at another party, but a guy I was talking to, Matt, convinced me to go. It was my first time going out to a place like this, and it was probably my last too. I told my parents I was going to a friend's house for a sleepover, but really we were putting glow-in-the-dark paint on each other's faces and taking selfies in our outfits. We looked like a couple of mannequins from Party City. Even though I'd always been part of a big group of friends, Lizzie was definitely my bestie. You could say we were a bad influence on each other, but we were just trying to have fun. She stole a bottle of vodka from her parents' liquor cabinet and we headed down the street where Matt came to pick us up. You could hear his beat-up truck from a mile away, and when he pulled up next to the curb, Lizzie gave me a look. He was a little older than us, but that wasn't something I thought too much about at the time. We sped out of the suburbs and into the surrounding countryside, leaving behind the quiet houses and streetlights as we veered off onto dirt roads surrounded by untamed shrubs and trees. We passed the vodka around as we drove and blasted music from the CD player. Felt like it was going to be an awesome night. Little did I know. The rave was in an abandoned mill all the way out past the farms and lodges near the woods. Half the roof had caved in decades ago, and there were rumors that it was haunted. But there was more than enough space for a decent party. Purple and green lights were glowing inside as we parked on the side of the road. And when we got out, the music was so loud you could feel the bass in the ground. Matt said he'd catch up with us later and head over to a group of guys he knew. Lizzie and I rushed inside out of the cold, and the place was totally packed. Everyone dressed to impress and was covered in neon paint. We danced and drank and mingled with random groups of people, having just as good a time as we were. It must have been around midnight when Matt came and grabbed me. He asked me if I had my Juul, and I told him yes. He told me there was a guy that had pods with THC in them, aka the stuff in dope that gets you high. He said the best part about them was that there was no way my parents would smell it on me when I got home, so we should go get some. We followed Matt to the back of the building where things were a little quieter. It was freezing cold, and I hugged my arms around myself, hoping this wouldn't take too long. Well, I was totally wrong. We walked for a while, following a path that led us through the woods until we were suddenly at the main road, and there was a van. The engine was running and the side door was open. A bunch of people were standing around in black clothes, masks covering their faces. I knew this was bad. Lizzie and I both stopped, paused to assess the situation, and then bolted back into the woods. We screamed for help as we tripped on fallen branches and slipped on dead leaves, running blindly through the trees and praying we didn't run into any of them. It wasn't long before I realized we'd gotten ourselves totally lost. Our only options were to try and get back to the party where someone might help us, or let these weird people catch us and do whatever they intended on doing. In the end, it turns out we didn't really have a choice. We could hear footsteps behind us and see flashlights getting closer and closer. We kicked off our heels and kept sprinting, trying to ignore each sharp rock and splinter stabbing our feet. I could see the light from the mill again, and we made a beeline to the edge of the trees. We were going to make it. And then I realized something terrible. There was a fence. A 7-foot chain link surrounded the part of the woods we ran into, and we couldn't see where it started or ended. Our only option was to climb. I tried to give Lizzie a boost up, but we were so tired from running, and the rain from that afternoon made the fence impossible to grip. They grabbed me first, then Lizzie, and dragged us both kicking and screaming back to the van. They tied us up, put masks over our eyes, and sat in silence as they drove us to God knows where. I honestly thought I was going to die that night. After like an hour, we came to a stop and our kidnappers started moving around, mumbling to each other. I heard the van door open and then the mask was ripped off my head. It was my parents! They were standing on the sidewalk next to Lizzie's, and I was so shocked and confused I couldn't find the words to say anything. It was an intervention. Matt had been helping our parents spy on us this whole time, helping them figure out just how much we were ruining our lives. Taking us to the rave, luring us outside, pretty much kidnapping us was all part of a scared straight plan they'd made up. I still don't agree with their methods, but looking back on it, they did the right thing by interfering. We were ruining our lives. After that, we were taken to separate facilities and put into rehab programs. I was so surprised when I came out months later and realized how much better I felt. So much more awake. It hasn't been an easy road. Lizzie couldn't stick with the program, and I haven't seen her for years now, but I hope she's doing okay. Whenever I feel like giving up, I think about that night and how my parents would definitely pull that stunt again if it meant keeping me safe. When I was in college, my best friend Allie was attending a university that was about 2 hours away from mine. In high school, we had been inseparable and spent nearly every day together. Even though we talked on the phone every single day, it was hard not seeing each other every single day once we went off to college. At one point, I had a 3-day weekend and wanted to visit her. Neither of us had a car at the time since we were freshmen and walked everywhere anyway. I also didn't know anyone on my campus who had a car and would be willing to drive me such a long distance. I did some research online and saw that there was a public bus system that had a bus stop within walking distance from my university. I could buy a ticket that would take me all the way to Allie's campus. I was a little nervous since I had never been such a long distance on a public bus before, much less alone, but I decided to purchase a ticket there anyway. Allie said that her older brother would be able to give me a trip back to my campus after the weekend was over. In the days leading up to the trip, Allie and I talked excitedly on the phone every night about all the fun things we were going to do while I was visiting. She was going to give me a tour of her campus and show me all of her favorite restaurants and coffee shops. On the day of the trip, I woke up early and packed a bag for myself. I then walked to the bus stop, my ticket in hand. When the bus pulled up, I passed the ticket to the driver and then walked down the aisle to find a seat. I instantly realized I may have made a mistake. While I'm not one to judge, the majority of the people on the bus appeared to be a little sketchy. Several men started staring at me fiercely, looking at my body up and down. There was a woman who was talking to herself, and another guy who was rocking back and forth and appeared to be on drugs. I was by far the youngest person on the bus. I found myself an empty seat towards the back of the bus, ignoring one man whistling at me as I walked past. I just sat down and put my AirPods in. I was just going to listen to music and mind my own business the rest of the trip. About an hour passed by and I was excited to be getting closer to my destination. I texted Allie and gave her an update on my location, and suddenly I heard a weird screeching sound and the bus lurched forward. I didn't pay much attention until we pulled up to a bus station a little while later. We weren't at our destination yet, and I knew this was an unplanned stop. The bus driver got out and began checking something under the hood of the vehicle. After about 15 minutes, he got back in the bus and told everyone there was an engine problem and we wouldn't be able to go any further. We would have to wait at the bus stop and see if we could catch another route to our destination. I groaned and gathered up my things as we all got off the bus, and I walked into the station and checked the incoming routes. There wasn't a bus that would be going to Allie's campus for another 3 hours. I was still an hour away from campus, and there was no way I could afford an Uber ride that far. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do when all of a sudden the man who had whistled at me on the bus approached me, a sly grin on his face. He told me how pretty I was and asked if I would like to get a hotel room with him. As he got closer to me, I realized that he reeked of alcohol. I told him I didn't want to go anywhere with him and that a friend was expecting me. He grew angry and grabbed my arm harshly. My heart began pounding in my chest and I was preparing to scream for help. And suddenly I heard a young woman yelling, "Miss, do you need some help?" I looked over and there was a woman standing next to her husband while holding a baby in her arms. I nodded my head hard. The husband approached me and stared down the drunk man until he released me. "We can give you a ride," the husband said. Because it was a family with a baby, I felt I could trust them. I told them where I was going, and they said they were actually heading to the campus too in order to visit with the woman's sister. They said that they would be happy to take me along. I thanked them, feeling a surge of relief. The husband opened up the car door for me while the mother and her baby went around to the other side. I climbed in and the man began driving. I fastened my seatbelt and looked around. Much to my confusion, I didn't see a baby seat. Was the woman holding the baby in the passenger seat? I craned my neck over to see, but the woman's arms were empty. Had there ever been a baby, or was the woman holding a doll or something to trick me into feeling safe enough to get in the car? Something wasn't right. My gut was telling me that. Hey, where did your baby go? I asked. There was no answer. I asked them again, thinking they hadn't heard me, but there was still no answer. You know what? You can just drop me off here. I'll catch a ride with a friend, I told them, desperate to get out of the car. There was still no response. I started to think about how odd it was that they just so happened to be heading to the exact same place I was. I was so desperate to get away from the drunk guy that I wasn't thinking rationally. Can you please let me out? I asked, panic rising even higher. You're staying right here, the man told me gruffly. I knew without a doubt that I was being kidnapped. Trying to be as subtle as possible, I pulled my phone out of my pocket and quickly texted Allie. Been kidnapped, in the car, heading north. I will call 911. Tell them to track my phone. I hit send, and then with my phone muted, dialed 911. I could see that I had connected with the dispatcher, even though I wasn't able to speak with them. Good, they could ping my phone now. Can you tell me where you're taking me? I asked the couple. No response. Are you going to hurt me? I asked. Only if you don't shut up, the woman said loudly, and then flashed a pistol at me briefly before putting it back in her lap. My heart was pounding, but I was glad to know that the police would be aware of the fact that they had a weapon and that I was in danger. I remained silent, my palms shaking, my eyes glued to the window, desperate to see any sign of an officer. We pulled onto the highway and the man was driving fast, too fast. We were well over the speed limit. Suddenly, I saw one of the most welcome signs I could imagine. Red and blue flashing lights directly behind us. They had found me. The man cursed under his breath while the woman urged him to drive faster. I was shocked. They weren't going to pull over? The man began flying through the traffic, winding into different lanes, barely missing vehicles. There were more police cars and they were all around us now, their lights and sirens on. I looked ahead and saw a semi. It was changing lanes. The man didn't see it in time and drove right into it. I braced myself for the impact. We were in the air and the car flipped several times. There was the awful sound of crunching and glass breaking before, finally, silence. I opened my eyes and saw that the car was upside down. I was suspended in the air by my seatbelt, but I didn't feel any pain. I looked to the front of the car and both the man and the woman were slumped over. I could hear the sounds of the police and paramedics outside of the car discussing the best way to get us out. I'm right here, I began calling. Suddenly, I saw a paramedic through the window, and he reached through the broken window and unlocked the door. He swung it open and began undoing my seatbelt while asking me questions about where I thought I was injured. I told him I felt okay. He helped me out of the vehicle and I was able to stand. Remarkably, I didn't see any markings on my body. Due to the protocol, I was taken to the hospital to be examined but was later released. The doctors called it a miracle. They told me I was lucky to be alive. As for the couple who kidnapped me, they were both killed upon impact. Police told me they were linked to a human trafficking ring and that I was likely going to be their next victim.
Welcome to the Dark Somnium. Here are 5 stories from the Let's Not Meet subreddit, as well as 2 poems from the Dark Tales subreddit. Enjoy. I met ye by the gallows tree. 'Twas dark and oh so late. The town had had its fun with ye, and vented forth its hate. I couldn't bear to leave ye there, despondent and alone. Impulsively, I cut the rope and took you to my home. I let you share my bed that night and kissed your cold, dead skin. I finally felt I found true love, and don't care if it's a sin. Your beauty soon began to fade, your skin began to rot, but still my love for ye remained. Forsake ye, I would not. Your bones are all that I have left, your skull adorns my bed. I think of ye obsessively, my princess of the dead. Number 1. In May, I finally graduated from university. My school is in a very safe, very upper middle class community. Most instances of crime were committed by students and were typical of most college campuses. Sexual assault and burglary. Reported instances of crime were typically on campus or in the downtown area and frat row. My school also had a few highly publicized sexual assault scandals, so I was already wary of the dangerous situations and avoided being most places alone at night. I lived off campus, an area that backed up to a part of town that was mostly families and the elderly. I never really felt unsafe until my senior year, when I had two run ins with peeping Toms. The first incident happened at the beginning of my final spring semester. I was often at my friend's apartment on the opposite end of town, usually just to hang out and do some homework. Their apartment was part of a complex that was solely for students and more or less run by the university. Four of my friends lived in this suite style apartment on the ground floor. But on this night, which was a Sunday, only two of them were home, and another was driving back to the area that night from her parents' house. All of us actually come from the same geographical area, and since graduation, we all still live near each other, which is great. I was hanging out with one of my friends who lived in the apartment. We'll call her Pat, and another friend that lived in the same building. We were waiting for our other friend, Brianna, who was driving back that night. I really wanted to wait for Brianna, but she was pretty notorious for being late. So after hanging out for a few hours, I was ready to go back to my apartment. As I was pretty tired already and wanted to Skype with my boyfriend before bed, I said goodbye to my friends and left, probably around 10:30 or 11 o'clock. I walked out into the parking lot and towards guest parking. Guest parking is situated up a tiny little incline at the other end of the building. As I mounted the small hill, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye and stopped very briefly. Turning to look to my left, I saw a man hurriedly stand up and move away from a first floor window with its lights on. I remember he was distinctly middle-aged, heavier set and balding, wearing a red t-shirt and jeans. My presence seemed to spook him as he began to move around the back of the building, out of my sight. He was also not very far from me, and I was spooked as well. So I quickly moved up the hill and got into my car. It was highly unusual to see a man of his age in the apartment complex, and my internal alarms were going off. When my doors were locked, I texted my friend Pat to tell her to make sure all her windows were locked and that they secured their back door, which didn't have a working lock. The apartment complex was slow to address tenant complaints. I told her I saw a man creeping around the first floor windows. I know our friend Brianna often left her window unlocked, so she could open it when she smoked. After alerting her, I drove back to my apartment, which was about 5 minutes. I was a little shaken, and I basically sprinted from my car to my apartment's back door. When I got inside, I Skype called my boyfriend and checked my texts. Pat and the other roommate that was home had locked all the windows and turned off the lights in the main living area. Pat told me I should report the incident to the police, and I was a little torn about doing so. My boyfriend agreed that I should report it, and I called the police department directly instead of 911. The officer that answered took my description and my personal info and thanked me for the call. He told me they would be sending some squad cars out to investigate. I didn't have any further contact with the police after that, but my friend Brianna said she arrived back at her apartment as the police were pulling up, lights flashing. Apparently, they couldn't find the guy, but the apartment complex did issue a warning and the description of the creeper. I'm glad I did call the police, even if they didn't find the man. My next encounter with a peeping Tom happened closer towards the end of the same semester. This is the one that scared me the most. For the first time in my life, I had my fight or flight instincts kick into overdrive. I was coming back from my same friend's apartment one night, and it was late, and it was fairly dark and windy. My apartment complex had only a few lights in the parking lot, and only a light at each front door on the buildings. More often than not, I would enter my apartment from the back door, which was a huge sliding glass pane. The backs of the apartment building were not lit, and each ground floor patio and bedroom window had hedges next to them, which made hiding pretty easy. On this particular night, I should have entered through the front door, but the back door was closer and I wanted to get inside, out of the wind. I walked across the parking lot into the back of my building, head down against the wind. I looked up as I got closer to my apartment, and my heart leapt into my throat. There was someone standing behind my neighbor's bushes, directly in front of their bedroom window. The silhouette was distinctly male, with short hair and broad shoulders. My fear was instantaneous. Whoever it was had seen me, and they ducked pretty quickly behind the bush. Knowing they had nowhere to really run, with me right in their path, I remember cursing myself because I had left my knife in my purse, and I had nothing in my backpack to defend myself with. I only had my keys in my hand. Knowing that, I sprinted to my back door as fast as my fat legs could carry me, cursed to myself as I struggled with the lock in the darkness, and got inside as quickly as I could. I locked the door and drew the curtain shut, backing away into the darkness. I was fucking terrified at this point. I thought I was alone in the apartment, and I thought this guy definitely knows I live here now. The only thing separating me from him was a glass pane. I rushed into my room. Livid that the apartment complex didn't put locks on our doors, I called my boyfriend almost in tears, telling him what happened as I looked for the knife. He stayed on the phone with me for a little bit as I calmed down. He was angry, but there was nothing he could do for me, being so far away. This time, I strongly considered calling 911 because this incident had happened only 20 or so feet from my own apartment. My body was pumping with adrenaline, which only made me feel more jumpy and scared. However, my boyfriend told me that the guy was probably gone at this point anyway, and that seeing me had scared him off. The fact that he had ducked to avoid me made it seem likely he had no intentions of hurting me, and I had interrupted his creeping. I was still scared, but I thanked him and hung up. What if the guy was still in the complex, looking for more windows he could see into? I texted my roommates asking if they were home. Both of them were, and they had been trying to fall asleep when I ran into the apartment like a madwoman. They both emerged from their rooms, and I told them about what I saw, and my one roommate told me that she was just as scared as I was. Apparently, girls had been reporting on Yik Yak that a man dressed in all black, face covered, had been harassing girls on and off campus, going so far as to chase some of them and threaten them. I was hoping the individual that I had encountered was not that person. I didn't sleep a wink that night. My bed was directly underneath a large window that sat at ground level, and I was always uneasy about it. But that night, it was much worse. I felt safer knowing I wasn't alone, but for the rest of the semester, I was extra cautious at night when I came home from work or my friend's place. I always had my knife in a reachable pocket. In hindsight, I really regret not reporting the incident to the police or the apartment complex. I didn't even say anything to our neighbors. They usually had all their blinds and curtains open at night. You could always see inside. For the two girls that lived there, that didn't seem so smart to me. But I didn't say anything to them because I didn't know them and figured they wouldn't believe me. However, about a week later, I started noticing that at night all their blinds and curtains were drawn. And I began to wonder if maybe they had seen someone at their window one night. I no longer live in that town, but to anyone out there that gets a kick out of peeping into people's homes, let's not meet. Number 2. Long-time lurker, first time posting in this subreddit, blah, blah, blah. A little backstory. My friend and I, Laurel, are both teenagers in high school. We both look fairly young as well. Laurel works at our local convenience, value, and service pharmacy. At the checkout, of course. Sometimes I'll go in and bug her if I feel like the store isn't going to be busy or she won't get in trouble. It was one of those days. I was leaning on the checkout, talking to her, as an older guy, maybe in his late 20s, comes up. If looks could kill, I'd be dead from the glare he gave. So I step out of the way, feeling a little awkward, as I watch the guy practically flirt my friend's ear off. He finishes checking out and leaves. She tells me that he comes in every day and always gets a bunch of random things, and that he seems really sweet. I leave a little bit after that as well, having a shit ton of homework I have to get through. As I leave, I notice the guy is still there and sitting outside, but I don't think anything of it, even though I should. I get a text from Laurel later that night when she got off work and said that fucker left a note on her car that went something like, "Stop making me come in to buy things just to talk to you. Give me a call. I'm up late," with his number written on it. Laurel tells her manager the next day, and like clockwork, the guy comes in that day. The manager tells him to leave, but he isn't welcome there. he starts making a huge scene. He screams about how much he loves her and how they're going to have an amazing life and how he can't keep him from her. So now, my friend has to be walked to her car each night and is not allowed to have alone shifts. Ugh, fuck off, creepy old guy. Never come near Laurel again. Number 3. This incident happened to me in July of 2015. Just for clarification, I'm a 22-year-old female. 2014 was a rough year for me. I went through an awful breakup with my first boyfriend that sent me into a depression that I never thought I'd get out of. After a 2-week visit at a psychiatry ward in a hospital, I finally started to open my eyes to how great life could be. Started working out, made some new friends, and decided to go into the dating game with the help of a funny little website called Plenty of Fish. I met a lot of weirdos on there, but also met some really decent people, so I can't say it was all bad. I stated in my profile that I wasn't looking for anything particular, but whatever happens, happens. A guy who lives about an hour away from me in a town where I grew up messaged me one day. We had mutual friends. A distant friend of mine dated his sister, who I met a few times, and she was cool. And after a few conversations on Plenty of Fish, we added each other on Facebook. Well, that summer, my best friend Katie and her boyfriend Lincoln and I decided to drive out to a bar in that town because Lincoln's friend was playing a gig. We'd been there for an hour or two, and it kind of buzzed, and I was kind of buzzed. I was messaging the guy from Plenty of Fish, Justin, and told him to swing by for a smoke and a chat. A few minutes later, Justin shows up, and we hang out for a few minutes before he goes to the other side of the bar to play the slot machines. Note that the entire time he was with us, he wasn't drinking at all, and just had his face in the slot machine for like 2 hours straight. At one point, I asked Katie if we could go out to her car because I wanted a shot of vodka that I brought, just in case I ran out of money and didn't feel drunk enough. She agrees, and her and Lincoln and I make our way out to the car. Lincoln ends up locking the keys in the car, and we're just there wondering if we should beat out the back window or find something to pry the door open with. And out comes Justin. We explain the situation to him, and he claims his house is down the road a bit, and he has a coat hanger or something that we can use to unlock the door. Katie and Lincoln agreed, and I offered to go with him, hoping to get to know him a little more on the way. Justin didn't seem drunk at all, and to this day, I'm not sure if he was and just really good at acting sober. We get in the car and pull out of the parking lot. We're barely 15 seconds away from the bar when we see a police car parked at the convenience store, across and up the street a little. The lights flicker on, and the car pulls out and starts coming after us right away. Justin is panicking. I don't know why. I tell him just to pull over and it'll be fine. But he had other plans, being a high-speed police chase. I don't know how fast he was going, but it felt like the speed of light. I remember telling him, I don't want to die. He said, don't worry. My house is close, I got this. He was turning corners like crazy, each time slamming on his brakes and spinning out 3 or 4 times before going again. 2 or 3 police cars were right behind us with sirens and lights on, but he was determined to lose them. Next thing I know, we're in a ditch, and Justin yells, run, and exits his car, running straight into the woods. I get out, very lucky to be unharmed. Some police officers are waiting for me at the top of the ditch, telling me to put my hands up and whatnot. I'm scared as fuck. Never thought I'd be in a situation like this. An ambulance shows up. I tell them I'm fine and don't need treatment. I then sit in a cop car for 2 hours straight, talking to an officer who was recording my statement. I had no way to get a hold of Katie, who at first thinks I ditched her to hook up with this guy. The cops finally reach her, and she's freaking out because they don't even tell her whether or not I'm okay over the phone. So she thought I was dead or seriously injured until she saw me in the flesh. They ended up smashing their back window out with a rock and rushed to come see if I was okay. Katie and I slow motion ran towards each other and gave each other the most loving hug while crying in each other's arms. It was a scary night, but it could have been a lot worse. And here's the best part. I received a message from Justin on Facebook the next day. He apologized, kind of. Proceeded to ask, round 2. Haha. He's even had the nerve to ask me to hang out multiple times since. Justin, you put my life in severe danger. We're never meeting again. Number 4. This whole thing happened a few months ago. I love my family, but they're really religious and conservative. And as a gay man, that can be quite problematic. I've never come out to my family, and only a handful of people know about my sexual orientation. I used to hate that I'm gay, and I'm still quite sensitive about it. Anyway, about 3 or 4 months ago, I decided to give Tinder a go, for shits and giggles. On my second day of Tinder, I came across a guy named Lucifer Z, a guy with long pink hair, all black contact lenses, his face covered with piercings and both arms covered with sleeve tattoos. I can't recall if I did it to be rebellious towards my Christian upbringing, or if I really did think he was attractive, or because I'm obsessed with all things macabre and horror related. However, I gave him a like and moved on. A few hours later, I got a message from Lucifer Z saying that he thought I was pretty cute. I didn't know how to feel about this. On the one side, I was flattered, but on the other, Christian upbringing side, I was disgusted with myself, that I had put myself in this position. The next day, I decided to message him back. Fast forward to a month later, after a lot of Tinder messages, texting, Snapchat conversations, I agreed to meet him. He said his band was playing in a heavy metal nightclub in the city, and that I should come and watch. And so I did. After a set, we met up, got drunk, and had a wild night. The next morning, I woke up in bed with him in his apartment. He was really sweet that morning, looking so much different without all his black contact lenses and piercings. He made me breakfast. We talked about this and that, and then I went home. We texted and called over the next few days, going out to places together. I had really fallen for him. Then things got really fucked up. He texted me on Saturday night, asking if I wanted to come with him to a devil-worshipping ritual with him at some guy who I've never met's place. I declined, not really feeling comfortable with the whole thing. He texted me back, "Suit yourself, bitch." I didn't know if he said this because he was angry with me for not wanting to go with him, or if he meant it as a joke. Either way, I forgot about it. At 2 a.m., he texted me this really disturbing and fucked up video of him and 2 other guys dressed in black robes murdering a sheep. I was really disturbed by this, and called him, launching abuse at him for sending me this video. All he said in reply was, "Satan wants your soul, gorgeous." I was stunned into silence. It was such a weird, bloody thing to say, and it wasn't just what he said, but the way he said it. From the sound of his voice, I could tell he was on ice. He called himself a casual meth head, whatever the fuck that is. I instantly freaked out and blocked him from everything. And 2 weeks later, I decided to unblock him. This was a big mistake. He sent me a Snapchat of him holding a dead cat with the caption, "I'm gonna slit your throat and fuck your corpse, motherfucker." I almost blacked out from fear and immediately called the cops. They picked him up and told him to leave me alone, and then charged him with animal cruelty charges. They found the sheep killing video and another video of him killing a dog on his phone. I haven't heard from him after the police got involved, and am relieved that I can finally put this whole fucked up incident behind me. Thanks for letting me tell my story. I needed to get it off my chest. Since this incident, I haven't dated again, and probably won't for a while. Number 5. I'm a 22-year-old female, but this happened when I was 13. I'll start off with some necessary background information. When I was 13, my aunt lived in a huge apartment complex with 150 plus units within the same city as my mom and dad. I would visit her all the time, just to spend time with her. Her complex had a great park and swimming pool. I was also very close to some of the neighborhood kids that were around my age. And this was during the summer of 2007. I was going to 7th grade that year, and this was the summer I stayed with my aunt to get out of my house. My aunt's apartment was on the bottom floor, on the very corner of her building. The buildings in the complex were surrounding the park and pool I frequented, to create a sealed-off community with 2 exits to the main road. The buildings were 3 stories high, with 6 apartments on each level, all connecting to an outside corridor, which connected to the stairs. Now that is cleared up, here's what happened. It was a particularly sunny day at the complex, so I decided I was going to go outside and see if any of my friends were outside, so I could hang out with them instead of wasting my day away inside. I changed into shorts and a t-shirt. I dressed way more tomboyish back then and headed out to my aunt's apartment. Made my way down to the corridor, came from underneath the stairs, and began walking to the park. I had only made it about halfway when I hear, "Hey, you!" loudly from a corridor 3 stories up. I look up and see a face, but can't make it out. I could tell it was a male, but his voice sounded like a kid's voice, and he looked like a kid from where I was. I pointed to myself and shouted back, "Me?" And he said, "Yeah, you. Can you come up here for a minute?" I stopped for a moment to think about the situation. My 13-year-old mind just chopped it up that he was one of the neighborhood kids wanting to talk or something, so without another thought, I headed up the stairs towards where I saw him. I finally got up there to see a black man, around 35 or 40, sitting on the steps waiting for me. He was dressed in a striped polo shirt, khaki shorts, and those sandals that make you think of Jesus. He seriously looks like an oversized 5-year-old. As soon as I saw him, I had a feeling in my gut of dread. I'm sure my face looked confused, and I blurted out, "What do you want?" He starts gawking about my hair and asks me why I dress the way I dress, and keeps suggesting I should go in his apartment so he could show me around. The creepiest thing is how he looked at me when he suggested it. It was the creepiest expression I've ever seen someone make. The expression is hard to explain, but led me to believe that even at 13, he had sinister plans once in his apartment. I quickly said that my aunt was expecting me, and that I needed to go back to her apartment or she'd come looking and I'd be in trouble. Then he tried to ask what number apartment it was, and if he could escort me there. I was shocked at the thought of that. I hastily said, "No, I can make it there on my own, but thank you anyway." He just looked at me with a blank stare for a few seconds, like he was thinking of what to do or say next. Then, his facial expression was now clearly disappointed, and before I could say anything else, I sprinted down the stairs and ran right back to my aunt's apartment. I didn't know if he had seen where I went. I didn't know if he followed. All I know is I didn't give him the chance to play out his sadistic intentions, whatever they were. I told my aunt, since she had seen me lock all the locks on the door and screen door. She called the cops, and I made a statement, but since he never touched me or physically harmed me, there wasn't much they could do about the situation. I made sure never to go up any more stairs, unless I for sure knew the person, and to stay away from the area where his apartment was for the rest of the summer. I don't know what would have happened had I not thought on my feet and stayed up on those stairs longer than I did. Apartment creeper from my teenhood, let's not meet again. Ever. A smell of gore upon the air, on yonder moor, I saw it there. Through the fog and rain my eyes did strain. Beyond the shore to see the thing, harsh and broken in its form, jagged edges born from its maw. Storm shadows blazing on the sea, what creature hellish doth this be? Slow, deliberate in its pace, I cannot fathom such a face. Its teeth, its eyes burning bright, its broken call searing through the night. Such creatures only nightmares be. But on yonder moor I saw it born, the creature of the devil's form, creeping slowly out of the sea. Hey everybody, I hope you like this video. These stories were originally supposed to be in the Let's Not Meet livestream